Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We're in John Wesley Bready, This Freedom Whence, England before and after Wesley. And Bready has already laid out for us the cost of the great ejection, that is the Puritan expulsion. The Puritans were expelled. We think of the Puritans usually as the persecutors. That's the common image you have if you've heard that word, know anything about the history. No, they were the persecuted. In this period, 1662 to 65, they were the persecuted. And so they are expelled, but on the other hand, later, not that long later, the opposition, the zealous opposition to the Puritans, the more serious high church clergy are also thrown out. So those two tragedies have already happened when we get to this part. That, of course, leaves, if you take care of all of the serious clergy on the right and all the serious clergy on the left, you're left with this soft middle. So how long can the Church of England and England itself survive with nothing but non-committed clergy? So he takes up the third tragedy here.
Yes, and the third tragedy is the suppression of convocation. The third tragedy is so closely associated with the second that it might be said to have sprang from it. Yet it can only be understood in its relation to a broad stream of influences flowing down from Commonwealth days. From the Restoration to the Revolution of 1688, squirearchy and hierarchy dominated the national outlook. Church and king was the watchword of the ruling
Oligarchy?
Yeah, okay. Prince, priest, and politician believed that the Civil War and the Commonwealth had demolished the constitutional framework of the country. So they set about to rebuild it according to their heart's desire, taking due pains that their own interests were not overlooked.
Divine right of kings was an assumption inherent in this new program, but the shameless personal conduct and profligate court of Charles II through 25 disappointing years were not easy to reconcile with any Christian conception of divinity. Moreover, it was not pleasant for the highest churchman to recall that Charles II, as sovereign head of the national church, had, on his deathbed, blessed the kneeling prelates, and a little later, in fear of the last enemy, had smuggled into his chamber a Roman Catholic priest, at whose hands he secretly received the last rites. When, therefore, James II, after the bloody assize, by treating the judges of the realm as his puppets, by violating the rights of Oxford and Cambridge universities, by dissolving Parliament and preparing to pack a new one, and by planning openly to establish the Roman Catholic Church as the national religion, asserted imperiously the divine right of kingship, grave misgivings were expressed in unexpected quarters. The episode of the 7 bishops defying the king's second declaration of indulgence and drawing up a protest against it gave warning that the divine right prerogative could be carried too far, and that passive obedience had its limits, even among the high church clergy.
Hence, when William of Orange was invited over to save the constitution of church and state, many high churchmen and squires acquiesced, and not a few supported him. But to the thoroughgoing traditionalist, William and Mary were regents, not sovereigns, for by his doctrine the crown could not be forfeited. Loyalty, therefore, to William, even from the beginning in Tory quarters, was halted and cold. But when in 1689 he granted the barest toleration of worship to such nonconformists as would subscribe to a specified 30 of the 39 articles, the resentment of reactionaries was all agog. I like that word. Their hatred of Puritanism was stronger than their fear of Rome. Then, too, the non-jurors, as a body, were firebrands. True, Ken and some others conducted themselves without malice and with much charity. But such proved the exception. The zeal of most of the non-jurying party soon turned sour and expressed itself in Jacobite plotting.
Jacobite being the pro-Catholic sympathizers.
Okay. To non-jurors as a group, the national church on their expulsion was schismatic and her prayers immoral. They alone could bestow apostolic orders, and through their sacraments alone flowed divine grace. After Mary's death, too, William's position became increasingly difficult, and during the latter years of his reign, continual plots were hatched against his life. Anne owed her ascension to the Revolution settlement, but at heart she was a sentimental reactionary with a warm attachment to the divine right theory. During her whole reign, the strife of parties, political and ecclesiastical, was violent, but during its latter part, the national cauldron seethed, and in the raging animosities engendered a series of co-related events gathered such momentum as to make the third tragedy inevitable.
In November 1709, Dr. Henry Sacheverell, a high churchman of little judgment and less charity, was invited to preach in St. Paul's Cathedral. With venomous rancor, he assailed both the Revolution settlement and the Toleration Act, whilst dissenters he depicted as wily serpents. That is, dissenters meaning people who were outside the Church of England and the Catholic Church. We must watch, urged Sacheverell, against these crafty, faithless, and insidious persons who can creep to our altars and partake of our sacraments, that they may be qualified more secretly and powerfully to undermine us. The end of Sacheverell's quote. The Whigs, already unpopular, instead of letting Sacheverell stew in his own broth, decided to impeach him before the Lords, and by so doing made mob heroes of him and the ultra-high church party. God save the church and the doctor, cried a drunken mob around his carriage en route to Westminster, pausing now and then to wreck a meeting house and to knock down all who refused to shout, "Sacheverell and High Church." In the wake of the Sacheverell riots, the Tories were hurled to power, and new fuel being added to already raging fires, the cauldron, now boiling, was soon to overflow. I guess it's pretty clear that England is headed to another revolution after the Puritan Revolution of the 1640s and the restoration of the 1660s through 80s. And this is some 60 or 70 years before the American and the French revolutions. England could have gone the same way. So Bready winds up the story of the triple tragedies in the next segment. I thought to link a video we did on The Servant of Jehovah, David Barron's book, marvelous book on the Servant of Jehovah, a king who did not cling to his divine rights.